There are some teething issues that can take a surprisingly long time to figure out. And in this week's video, amongst other things, I'll be discussing an issue that's come back to bite me a couple of times whilst trimming a tool jar with a stepped lid, a stepped base, and strategically inserted fragments of bronze to create locating points on the body and the lid. Now, the main teething issue I want to speak about is something that doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it completely ruins a piece, and that's this thin spot towards the bottom of the pot. It's normally a remnant left from lifting up the walls and trying to squeeze up as much as you can from the bottom. Now, if you throw pots like this and you don't trim them, this might easily not create any issue at all. But if you've been watching my videos for long enough, you'll know that trimming is a big part of what I do. Thus, if there is a thin spot like this towards the bottom, and then I trim the exterior shape, refining the walls and thinning them, it can exacerbate the thin spot towards the bottom to the point where, if fired, this portion of the wall will begin to buckle, bow outward, and even collapse, ruining the shape of the pot made. Here's one example of that on a porcelain vase, the bottom tapering section of which was initially trimmed to be perfectly straight, but due to my inconsistent throwing, it no longer is, and this pot can be deemed a second or a third. You can see it on this jar too, although it is a bit more subtle. The wall of the pot just pinches in towards the base. And you can sort of see it from the inside too, as an indent almost, bowing outward against the otherwise straight interior. And on this thinly trimmed black lined vase, you can also see it, a slight undulation outward which completely goes against the severity of the angles on the rest of the form. I noticed this happening more and more on my pots, so recently I've been really focusing on keeping this internal wall completely straight. This way, with no thin spot towards the bottom, the excess weight of the pot above it doesn't cause this part to buckle. It's obvious, really, when you think about it. But sometimes things like this occur and it takes time for you to figure out and really think about what's happening. And it's for this reason that I've been trying to throw my pots with much less severe throwing rings on the inside, as if they are quite prominent and then you trim the outside. In theory, you're creating tons of thin spots, areas that might buckle, but it also means that glaze will be absorbed into these areas differently, in bands almost, as more glaze will adhere to those areas where the clay is thicker. I know this portion is a bit of a stretch, as my throwing rings don't tend to be this prominent, but considering just how much I trim some of my pots, it's something that's useful to think about, as when this occurs on a larger piece it can be incredibly disappointing, such as on this old jar. It isn't that noticeable, but if you look closely, the bottom section does bow outward. Once again, due to me pushing out too much at the throwing stage and creating an internal shape that's not consistent. And the fix for this, honestly, is so easy. It's just to be more attentive when you're pulling up the walls and really looking at the finished shape inside. Which is exactly what I did with this tool jar. There are still some throwing rings on the inside, but nothing that's going to cause any issues, I think. And the lowest portion of the wall meets the base in a straight right angle. The throwing rings at the top are a bit stronger than I'd like, but I'll be able to soften them easily, as they're still quite accessible being so high up on the piece. So I'm going to begin trimming what are essentially two rough blanks of clay, turning them both into something that's much more refined. When trimming jars, I always begin with the lid. It's tap-centered, upside down, and I slot the body over it to see how well it fits. In this instance, it fits perfectly, which I'm actually not particularly happy about. I prefer it when they feel a bit tight, as this way I can remove material from the vertical flange, cleaning it up and really straightening it, all whilst knowing that it will still fit. But at this point, if it fits perfectly straight away, it means potentially I won't be able to clean this part up to my exact liking, as if I were to remove too much clay, I could end up with a lid that's actually a bit too loose and rattles when placed in situ in the body, and that's something I really want to avoid, as it implies there's been a slight lack of attention to detail. It's this portion I need to be careful removing clay from, and I'm going to take away just enough to make sure it's lovely and flat. That's it. I'll then burnish this top edge, after which I try and remove as much clay as possible from inside this well in the centre, as to remove as much weight from this part of the pot as I can. The lids I make tend to be on the weighty side anyway, so I try my best to remove as much of the excess material as I can, although there will still be a lot more work to do on this lid, but I can't trim away from the top of it or the sides until a bit later on in this process. Moreover, here I'm flattening the bottom and trimming a sharp right angle in the corner, and I don't want any excessive throwing or trimming marks left. This portion is undulating. It's uneven, but as soon as the wheel stops spinning, your eye will cease noticing it. And as this flange will be kept mostly internal, it isn't something I need to worry about fixing completely. With the lid sort of half trimmed, it can be taken off and the jar section can be slipped onto the wheel. I brush the watery clay directly on the wheel head, making sure I don't put down too much, otherwise the piece will simply hydroplane off. And I also make sure I only brush it around the outside. This way, when it comes to separate the pot from the wheel, I don't have to slide the metal skin too far underneath the piece. As the jar is tap-centered, the slip quickly dries, fusing the pot in place. In fact, this alone sticks it down really securely, but for a bit of added security, I also blend in the bottom portion of the wall like so, sealing clay against metal. And here, I'm shaking it back and forth to really try and dislodge it, but it's held down so securely, which is great for me as a potter who likes to trim so much, as it means I can work the entirety of the walls and the top without any lumps of clay or mechanical arms getting in the way. These would normally mean that I can't trim around the bottom third of the jar. Instead, I can trim all the way from top to bottom, thinning the wall out and creating a more slender shape. As I do this, I grip the tool right by the blade, and as I move it down the side of the pot, I don't let it follow the wall of the piece. In fact, it's held steadily enough so that I'm sort of drawing a line from top to bottom, trimming away more in some places as the widest points, however subtle, spin around. Simply put, I'm not just running the tool down without thinking, instead I'm constantly trying to keep it steady and monitoring how much clay is passing through the blade. If you have a pot that undulates considerably, and the way you turn it is simply by letting the blade follow the shape of the pot as it spins around, then you're only going to exaggerate the undulation the shape has, whereas in fact you want to trim in such a way that those undulations that might appear are dealt with and turned through, eliminating them, essentially, and creating a shape that spins true. I used a smaller portion of the blade initially, as by doing so I've got far more control. Then, on the subsequent passes, I switched to using a larger portion of the blade, as the surface itself has been made more even during that first pass, and now I can focus on straightening the piece and removing the worst of the turning marks. My left hand, by the way, is kept inside the vessel opposite the area I'm trimming. This way I can constantly feel the cross-section of the pot. I brace both my hands together as I do this to build stability and move them really gradually, not too fast or not too slow, and I definitely try to not linger in one spot for too long, as it's relatively easy to turn away more than you'd like and create a thin spot. Could I have thrown this initial cylinder thinner? Yes. But on the whole, I think I prefer always having slightly more material to work with, especially with larger, one-off pieces like this. But I also think you would be surprised by just how light some of the pots I make are, especially pots such as the bowls or mugs I make. In a way, they don't even need trimming. Just a quick tidy up would probably suit them well, but by turning their walls and their feet to be only a few millimeters thick, I'm able to create things that are almost feather light. I'm removing the pot here, by the way, simply to test how heavy it is, which is something you shouldn't be afraid to do, especially with shapes you're unfamiliar with. The pot itself can easily just be reattached to the wheel and centered, which is why it's helpful to not be intimidated by this centering process itself, as it's so fundamentally important to be able to take the pot quickly on and off in order to get a grasp of your progress. The last thing I do for the exterior shape is give it a good scraping over with a sharp, straight kidney like this, and then I place a ruler next to it to make sure it's straight. If I feel like the surface is too scratched, I very lightly wet the walls with a sponge, like so, and then compress over this surface with a plastic kidney. I do this to cover up and hide any of the more prominent scratches or pockmarks left from where bits of grog have been torn out. I fired a few pots recently where scratches left in the claywork have been too deep, resulting in the glaze pooling in them and creating these distracting lines, which is precisely why I refired this piece flooded with black iron oxide. This process of softening the surface and then burnishing it smooth gets rid of the worst of these, meaning the glaze will sit more evenly over it. I don't trim the very top yet, I do the lid first, which I can place on top, the opening holding it in place like a chuck. I do also place a spinner on top, as if I exert a lot of pressure to the sides of the lid without anything holding it down, there's a chance it would catch on the turning tool and leap up. So, by centering a spinner on top of it and then pressing down through this, I can negate that, and the lid will be held firmly in place as I trim the sides and turn that stepped shape I'm after. I begin by flattening the side and the top edge to create a nice smooth, sharp right angle at the top. The top side of the lid can be a bit ragged, as this is the part that was wired through when separating it from the wheel. As a result, this outer edge can be a bit uneven, so I trim it back until I'm happy with it, and so that it's crisp and even all the way around, which is another reason I throw these lids wider and larger than need be, as by there being too much clay, I can always trim it back to my exact liking. But on the other hand, if there isn't enough, I'll be left with a lid that I simply dislike. The next step is to create that step, which I do by trimming about halfway up, digging the top corner of the blade into the mass of clay. The trouble is, from this angle, turning the ledge to be completely to my liking is incredibly difficult, as I'm essentially working upside down, so I won't finish it to its final appearance now. Instead, at the end, I'll flip the lid back upside down and finish it then. The top portion of the lid needs some work too. As you can see, it's still covered in the wiring off marks, so those are the first things I remove. But perhaps the biggest thing about trimming the lids is turning the top side so it has a concave surface. Here's a cross section of a lid with a flat top, and when glazed it'll pull like this, creating a somewhat convex surface, softening what's meant to be an angular, sharp shape. This isn't ideal, so instead of leaving the top flat, I turn it to have a concave surface. This way, when dipped in glaze, it'll fill this hollow, creating a flat surface, whilst also maintaining the same level of interest due to the glaze being thick. On the sides, the glaze will run down slightly over this vertical surface, but it doesn't round the shape nearly as much as it would if the glaze was piled on top, without a section to pull in. This also removes a bit more weight from the lid, although I suppose it will be filled up with glass. I'm not sure which is heavier. But here's a finished version of what I'm aiming for, albeit on the smaller side. As my aim is to create a curved surface, I'll be using a curved blade, and even though I'm no longer using the spinner to press down with, I'm still applying considerable downward pressure using my fingertips, or the blade itself when it's in the middle of the lid. I don't want to make it too deep. In fact, the drawing I showed you a second ago likely had too much of a curve, as there is a risk if glaze is piled too thickly that it'll crack the stoneware underneath it. At the same time, if you trim too much, you could make this surface too thin, or even turn a hole through it. The lid is now 90% finished, and the last 10% I'll do at the very end. With the lid off, I now trim the rim to be much finer. My initial reasoning for doing this was that if I trimmed it thin initially, with all the weight of the lid and the spinner placed on top of it, there's a chance this section could bow inward or collapse. This has actually happened to me on numerous occasions, and since then, it's always something I've done after turning the lid. This way, this part remains nice and strong and supportive, yet at the same time I will be turning this whole assemblage, trimmed and all, upside down, and turning the base of this part, which means this thinly trimmed section is going to have to take that weight anyway. So in all honesty, I'm not sure it makes that much of a difference. I think what actually plays a larger role is how dry the clay is, as when it's drier, it's more brittle, and therefore the clay will crack and break more easily. Speaking of keeping the clay in the right condition, if I need to pop out of the workshop for any period of time, I simply sling some plastic over the pot I'm working on. This way it doesn't dry out more than I'd like. Although even doing this, I felt like some of the finer edges were just a bit soft, and I didn't want to flip the pot upside down onto the lid if the very top, delicate edge was on the softer side, as it could easily be damaged when flipped over and placed onto the metal. Of course, before positioning this entire assemblage upside down, I first have to remove any crud left over on the wheel, as clay or dust left here could embed itself into that fine edge I was just speaking about. The good thing about the lid fitting so well is that it sort of acts like a chuck for the body, holding it in place as I trim its base. Now, I want to do something a bit different on the bottom of this. I want to trim a stepped shape that mimics the step in the lid, somewhat akin to the mugs you may have seen me make recently, where the bottom of each cup matched the actual shape of the vessel itself. I'll leave a link to that video on screen now and in the description below if you'd like to see it. But essentially, I threw this base relatively thick so that there was ample material for me to trim an interesting bottom. I think there's about 1.5 centimeters worth of material to play with, so I should be able to turn an interesting shape here. Typically, when trimming the bottoms of pots, I start from the middle and work my way outward, but I also don't get too close to the edge when I'm carving away clay in these long passes like this, as it's incredibly easy to get carried away and let the tool carve away more than you'd like. I use tungsten tipped blades for most of this, and this L-shaped hook is wonderful for trimming these sharp, straight edges. Although with this grogged clay body, it doesn't necessarily leave the cleanest finish, as the sharp tip tears away those particles of grog, leaving quite a ragged edge, whereas the steel tools I use that are far more blunt burnish and soften these edges, yet they come with the downside of just not being able to remove material in quite the same capacity. This means when finishing pots like this, there's lots of back and forth, swapping between the two types of tools depending on the task at hand. As the lid only really had one step, I'll be trimming the base to reflect that. I'm applying pressure downward with my fingertip and the blade, and as the blade moves further out, the majority of that downward pressure switches to my middle finger in this instance, as even though the lid is holding the body tightly in place, as where I'm trimming is so high up in comparison, the vessel will want to teeter from side to side, so if you don't have control of that, the tool cylinder will just tip over. I use this really tiny turning tool to do the last bits of finishing, such as trimming the vertical portion of the steps. And once all is to my liking, I can stamp the pot with my maker's mark, pressing it in lightly and rocking it from corner to corner so that it leaves a clear impression. If you've been watching me for a while now, you'll know that I've been placing my pots on these high-pressure laminate bats that are incredibly smooth. I use these so no texture is embedded into the bottoms of my pots. As with some of my MDF bats, or the wooden wearboards I use, the texture from those can mark the bottoms of my leather hard pots. They can also warp, so not only can they potentially imprint texture on the bottoms of my pieces, but if the wood itself warps as the pot is still drying, it could have a subtle influence on the pot shape, distorting it, which is especially prevalent on things such as flatware and plates, whereas these HPL bats stay perfectly flat. Either way, recently, for many of my larger, one-off pieces, I've been both storing and drying them on these. Once flipped over, I noticed a small mound of clay on the floor of the pot, so I used a long wooden throwing stick with the sharp edge just to scrape it off. As if left, the glaze would gather over it, creating a thick glassy lump in the bottom. And the last thing I need to do is just tidy up the underside of the lid, as inevitably there are some burrs of clay and scratch marks from where the rim of the jar has rubbed against this component. So I retrim these planes, making them flat and smooth, using a steel tool as it leaves a cleaner surface. I press my fingertips against the sharpest edges, otherwise these parts will be incredibly easy to chip and damage. And the last, very important thing to do is to trim the underside of the step, which I'll make into a sharp right angle, something that's much easier to do now the lid is this way up. The lid is then gently flipped over, and the very last thing I do is just finish the top edge of the lid, sharpening it and just checking for any defects, such as tool marks, finger marks, or burrs of clay jammed into it. It's then very carefully placed onto the body, and like this, I'll let these two parts sit with a sheet of plastic slung loosely over them. And if I remember, every day I'll rotate the lid just a bit, just to make sure it can still move and doesn't get stuck, which is certainly something that can happen with tight-fitting lids. Now, the very last thing I want to do is embed two specks of bronze into this piece, one in the lid and one just beneath it on the body. This is approximately how they should look once fired, and the idea is that these two chunks of metal will look somewhat like they do on the left piece. From a functional standpoint, they don't do anything, but from a purely visual perspective, they can be lined up, creating a face for the vessel, an obvious orientation to display it, and a way to position the lid on the body when it's not in use. I insert them gently and then press them in with the flat edge of this metal stone carver, and then I very delicately just sponge over each chunk of metal to blend in the stoneware around them. That's all there is to it. 2 fragments of metal to create a locating point on each part, and another pot added to my stores which I can't wait to fire. You'll have to pop back for that video though, sometime soon. Thank you so much for taking your time to watch, and as always, I'll see you next time.